This show is part of the Head Stuff Podcast Network.
Welcome, gather round the fireside and listen to a tale of Fionn McCool, Cú Chulainn, Deirdre of the Sorrows, Gráinne Wail. From giants right down to fairies, of both the drooping and solitary, and those who are sometimes scary. Anything goes by the fireside. Yeah. Fireside, the Puka Fireside, the Marrow Fireside. Kings and queens fighting heroes, don't you run from the fun, there's no need to hide. Sit by the fireside. Fireside.
Hello and welcome to Fireside, the Irish storytelling podcast. Each episode of Fireside, we take a story from folklore or mythology, we retell it, have a chat about the tale itself and about the craft, the culture and the history of storytelling. My name is Kevin C. O'Lahan. I'm your host and your Fireside Bard. Welcome to episode 201 of Fireside. We are well and truly in the 200s now. Today on the Irish Storytelling Podcast, we have our Christmas special. Welcome back once again to a Fireside Christmas. And we have a very special one for you this evening. It's the evening for me as I'm recording anyway. Before we get down to that, I would like to give a big welcome to any new, any returning listeners. Thank you so much for your recent or continued support. Thank you so much to those who listened and responded and messaged me about the 200 special. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. It was a really reinvigorating, very exciting episode to do. It felt like it was beginning to take the podcast in a new direction and growing again. And there was so much in that story that I really loved, and I hope that had some kind of impact and resonated with you all in any way as well. So thank you so much. And it's onwards and upwards from here. We go straight into our Christmas special. All the new normal ways you can support the podcast. You can follow me over on Instagram at Fireside Bard. You can share this episode on your stories. Tell a friend about Fireside. You can buy my book, Garden Sea, in paperback form from the Head Stuff website, or in Kindle version from Amazon. You can get it instantly. This will come out just a couple of days before Christmas, so it'll be too late for the Christmas orders, except some very last minute ones in Ireland. All of the Christmas orders that have been received so far have gone off, so they will be there in time for Christmas. But if you are looking for a post-Christmas present, if you didn't manage to get in time, or you're just looking to support the podcast or interested in the book, Garden Sea, My Neo-Myth of Home, is still available. And thank you again to all of those who continue to buy it each and every month. Thank you so much. It's a great, great joy. It never loses the impact to receive those orders and to send them off, whether it's to a neighbouring county, my home county, the UK, or further afield to America or Australia or New Zealand or wherever else. So thank you so much. And I look forward to the next new place that I get to send it and to share it with someone else and share it with more of you. If you're not interested in the book, you can, of course, support the podcast directly by joining Head Stuff Plus at headstuffpodcast.com, where for as little as €5 a month, although you can pay more if you want. You can gain access to not just bonus material for Fireside, but for all of the podcasts on the Head Stuff Podcast Network. But enough of those hard sales. The story for this week, I'm recording to you still from New Zealand. We are just about to head to Christchurch in the morning on the South Island for our last two shows. So I'm recording this the night before my last two shows in New Zealand. We've had an incredibly special time touring around the country with the world of musicals. It's an absolutely magnificent country. I've loved touring around it, and I've loved experiencing it with the cast I've been working with, and very much look forward to coming back to this incredible place. And the show has gone down very well. It's been very successful. But I'm very, very much looking forward to going home for Christmas as well. Christmas at home is the ultimate cure for a post-tour, post-work blues, especially considering I haven't been able to spend Christmas properly at home for 3 years, really. Last year I was working over in Dubai, and the year before that I was at home, but I was doing a storytelling gig in the K Club on Christmas Day itself, so I had to travel away for that. Got home for dinner, but you know, that's if you're able to be at home for Christmas and you're happy to be at home, then there's nothing like just being able to go home and switch off and just enjoy the time. And that's what I'm very much looking forward to do. So we fly home on the 22nd. Very, very long few flights. I think our first flight is 18 hours to Dubai, and then about another 7 or 8 hours from Dubai to Dublin. So everything crossed. So keep your prayers and your thoughts and your well wishes to the other folk all in your Fireside Bard's favour as he flies back home, flying home for Christmas. But with that in mind, when I was developing and thinking of ideas for a Christmas special, because it's been summer over here, which, don't get me wrong, has been magnificent, and it's been lovely to spend winter in the summer, but it's very hard to feel Christmassy over here. I'm not doing a Christmassy kind of show, and even if you go into shops, it just doesn't have that same feel of being at home. If you're from a country that is wintry at Christmas, there's no comparison to that, I think, or certainly that's my preference. So it's been hard to get in the spirit. I haven't been watching any of the materials or the films or anything, but what I did do was I re-listened to an audiobook of A Christmas Carol, which will always be the standard, the classic, and one of my personal favourite books of all time. And it's a book that's very special for me because I was in a production of it in Dublin just before the arse fell out of everything in the world at the end of 2019 and the start of 2020 at the Gate Theatre, which was one of the most important shows I was ever a part of. Certainly probably the most credible or high profile thing I've ever got to be a part of a really truly historic theatre in Irish theatre history, and just to be with a truly incredible cast and team working on that, and at a very, very special time. And so that really, and it was an incredible adaptation by Jack Thorne as well, that has been done 1,000 times in London. I think it was written originally for Risa fans to star as Scrooge, but I adore it as an adaptation. And growing up, the quintessential Christmas movie for myself and my brother has always been A Muppet Christmas Carol, which you may laugh, you may love it, but it is considered one of the more faithful adaptations of Dickens' work. Essentially, all of the dialogue and all of the narration in it that isn't inherently Muppety, shall we say, is almost always lifted directly from the novel. And so when I first read the novel itself, which was probably about 10 or 12 years ago, it started to become a thing I revisited a lot because it's very short. For example, you can basically read it all on Christmas Eve or in the couple of days leading up to Christmas. And the version on Audible that I was listening to was the Hugh Grant version. And Hugh Grant, I have to say, he doesn't get enough credit for his voice. He was an incredible narrator and storyteller for it. And so that just made me think that it being the quintessential ghost story, not even just Christmas story, but the breadth of folklore and just the mastery of prose and of storytelling in Dickens' work, just felt like it was the right time to do something from A Christmas Carol. And I decided to focus entirely on it because I didn't want to just do a passage out of context. I wanted to essentially do the entire first chapter of A Christmas Carol. It's only split into 5 chapters, but that was naturally going to be quite long. It was going to be about 3 episodes worth of Fireside in length if I was to read it all. So I decided rather than doing a passage, I very humbly attempted to edit this myself. It's been an extremely edited story throughout different interpretations and different productions, which is a very, very difficult task because it is essentially word perfect. Every line in it carries the story forward. Every line in it has become incredibly iconic, whether in one adaptation or 1,000 adaptations. So when I was trying to humbly do this, I was just trying to entirely think of it from an audio point of view and the fact that I am reading it for you. And I decided I was making decisions when I was cutting. I never changed anything, just where I could streamline it. So I decided what was the clearest version of it that I wanted to tell for my purposes here. This introduction's very long, but I suppose I wanted to give more context to it because some people might be saying, why is he doing this? But we had touched on it before when we did the story of the goblins who stole a sexton, which was the story that Dickens wrote that inspired this. But now it's time to get into the real deal itself. We will chat a bit more about it, of course, afterwards. But this is A Christmas Carol on Fireside. A Christmas Carol, being a ghost story of Christmas. Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Mind, I don't mean to say that I know, of my own knowledge, what there is particularly dead about a doornail. I might have been inclined myself to regard a coffin nail as the deadliest piece of ironmongery in the trade. But the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simile, and my unhallowed hands shall not disturb it, or the country is done for. You will therefore permit me to repeat, emphatically, that Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead? Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee, his sole friend, and sole mourner. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully caught up by the sad event that he was an excellent man of business on the very day of the funeral, and solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood, years afterwards, above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge, and sometimes Marley. But he answered to both. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted, hand-at-the-grindstone Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire, secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say with gladsome looks, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what it was o'clock. No man or woman ever once in all his life inquired the way to such and such a place of Scrooge. Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming on, would tug their owners into doorways and up courts, and then would wag their tails as though they said, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye, dark master." But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked. To edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance, was what the knowing ones call nuts to Scrooge. Once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting-house. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation he had of his approach. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug!" "Christmas a humbug, Uncle?" said Scrooge's nephew. "You don't mean that, I'm sure." "I do," said Scrooge. "Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough." "Come then," returned the nephew gaily. "What right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough." Scrooge, having no better answer ready on the spur of the moment, said, "Bah!" again, and followed it up with, "Humbug." "Don't be cross, Uncle," said the nephew. "What else can I be?" returned the uncle. when I live in such a world of fools as this. Merry Christmas. Out upon Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older and not an hour richer? A time for balancing your books and having every item in 'em through a round dozen of months presented dead against you? If I could work my will, said Scrooge indignantly, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should. Uncle, pleaded the nephew. Nephew, returned the uncle sternly, keep Christmas in your way and let me keep it in mine. Keep it, repeated Scrooge's nephew. But you don't keep it. Let me leave it alone, then, said Scrooge. Much good may it do you. Much good it has ever done you. There are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say, returned the nephew. Christmas among the rest. But I am sure I have always thought of Christmas time when it has come round, apart from the veneration due to its sacred name and origin, if anything belonging to it can be apart from that, as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time, the only time I know of in the long calendar year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely, and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave, and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good, and will do me good, and I say, God bless it. The clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded. Becoming immediately sensible of the impropriety, he poked the fire and extinguished the last frail spark forever. Let me hear another sound from you, said Scrooge, and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation. You're quite a powerful speaker, sir, he added, turning to his nephew. I wonder why you don't go into Parliament. Don't be angry, uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow. Why did you get married? Said Scrooge. Because I fell in love. Because you fell in love, growled Scrooge, as if that were the only thing in the world more ridiculous than a Merry Christmas. Good afternoon. I am sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute. We have never had any quarrel to which I have been a party, but I have made the trial in homage to Christmas, and I'll keep my Christmas humour to the last. So, a Merry Christmas, uncle. Good afternoon, said Scrooge, and a Happy New Year. Good afternoon, said Scrooge. His nephew left the room without an angry word. Notwithstanding, he stopped at the outer door to bestow the greetings of the season on the clerk, who, cold as he was warmer than Scrooge, for he returned them cordially. There's another fellow, muttered Scrooge, who overheard him. My clerk, with 15 shillings a week, and a wife and family talking about a Merry Christmas. I'll retire to Bedlam. Scrooge resumed his labours with an improved opinion of himself, and in a more facetious temper than was usual with him. At length the hour of shutting up the counting-house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool and tactily admitted the fact to the expectant clerk at the tank, who instantly snuffed his candle out and put on his hat. You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose, said Scrooge. If quite convenient, sir. It's not convenient, said Scrooge. The clerk observed that it was only once a year. A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December, said Scrooge, buttoning his greatcoat to the chin. But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier next morning. The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers, and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. Now it is a fact, that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door, except that it was very large. And then let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, without its undergoing any intermediate process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face. It wasn't angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up on its ghostly forehead. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. To say that he was not startled, or that his blood was not conscious of a terrible sensation to which it had been a stranger from infancy, would be untrue. But he put his hand upon the key he had relinquished, turned it sturdily, walked in, and lighted his candle. He did pause with a moment's irresolution before he shut the door, and he did look cautiously behind it first, as if he half expected to be terrified with the sight of Marley's pigtails sticking out into the hall. But there was nothing on the back of the door, except the screws and nuts that held the knocker on. So he said, "Pooh, pooh," and closed it with a bang. Up Scrooge went, not caring a button for that. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. But before he shut his heavy door, he walked through his rooms to see that all was right. He had just enough recollection of the face to desire to do that. "Humbug," said Scrooge, and walked across the room. After several turns, he sat down again. As he threw his hat back on the chair, his glance happened to rest upon a bell, a disused bell that hung in the room and communicated for some purpose now forgotten with a chamber in the highest story of the building. It was with great astonishment and with a strange, inexplicable dread that as he looked, he saw this bell begin to swing. It swung so softly in the outset that it scarcely made a sound, and soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This might have lasted half a minute or a minute, but it seemed an hour. The bells ceased as they had begun, together. They were succeeded by a clanking noise, deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. Scrooge then remembered to have heard that ghosts in haunted houses were described as dragging chains. The cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and then he heard the noise much louder on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door. "It's humbug still," said Scrooge. "I won't believe it." His colour changed, though, when without a pause it came on through the heavy door and passed into the room before his eyes. The same face, the very same. Marley in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights and boots, the tassels on the latter bristling like his pigtail, and his coat skirts and the hair upon his head. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long and wound about him like a tail, and it was made of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was so transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see the 2 buttons on his coat behind. How, said Scrooge, caustic and cold as ever. "What do you want with me?" "Much," Marley's voice, no doubt about it. "Who are you?" "Ask me who I was." "Who were you, then?" said Scrooge, raising his voice. "You're particular, for a shade." He was going to say "to a shade," but substituted this as more appropriate. "In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley." Can you sit down?" asked Scrooge, looking doubtfully at him. "I can." "Do it, then." Scrooge asked the question, because he didn't know whether a ghost so transparent might find himself in a condition to take a chair, and felt that in the event of its being impossible, it might involve the necessity of an embarrassing explanation. But the ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace, as if he were quite used to it. "You don't believe in me," observed the ghost. "I don't," said Scrooge. "Why do you doubt your senses?" "Because," said Scrooge, "a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are." At this, the spirit raised a frightful cry, and shook its chain with such a dismal and appalling noise that Scrooge held on tight to his chair to save himself from falling in a swoon. But how much greater was his horror when the phantom, taking off the bandage round its head as if it were too warm to wear indoors, its lower jaw dropped down upon its breast. Scrooge fell upon his knees and clasped his hands before his face. "Mercy," he said, "a dreadful apparition. Why do you trouble me?" "It is required of every man," the ghost returned, "that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men, and travel far and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world, oh, woe is me, and witness what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth, and turned to happiness." Again the spectre raised a cry, and shook its chain, and wrung its shadowy hands. "I wear the chain I forged in life," replied the ghost. "I made it, link by link, and yard by yard. I girded it on my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Is its pattern strange to you?" Scrooge trembled more and more. "Or would you know," pursued the ghost, "the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? It was full and heavy and as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have laboured on it since. It is a ponderous chain." Scrooge glanced about him on the floor in the expectation of finding himself surrounded by some 50 or 60 fathoms of iron cable, but he could see nothing. "Speak comfort to me, Jacob." "I have none to give," the ghost replied. "My spirit never walked beyond our counting-house. Mark me. In life my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole, and weary journeys lie before me. Oh, captive, bound, and double-ironed," cried the phantom, "not to know the age of incessant labour by immortal creatures, for this earth must pass into eternity before the good of which is susceptible is all developed. Not to know that any Christian spirit working kindly in its little sphere, whatever it may be, will find its mortal life too short for its vast means of usefulness. Not to know that no space of regret can make amends for one's life's opportunities misused. Yet such was I. Oh, such was I." "But you were always a good man of business, Jacob," faltered Scrooge, who now began to apply this to himself. "Business?" cried the ghost, wringing its hand again. "Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. It held up its chain at arm's length, as if that were the cause of all its unavailing grief, and flung it heavily upon the ground again. "Hear me," cried the ghost. "My time is nearly gone." "I will," said Scrooge. "But don't be hard upon me. Don't be flowery, Jacob. Pray." "How it is that I appear before you in a shape that you can see, I may not tell. I have sat invisible beside you many and many a day." It was not an agreeable idea. Scrooge shivered and wiped the perspiration from his brow. "That is no light part of my penance," pursued the ghost. "I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate. A chance and hope of my procuring Ebenezer." "You were always a good friend to me," said Scrooge. "You will be haunted," resumed the ghost, "by 3 spirits." I think I'd rather not," said Scrooge. "Without their visits," said the ghost, "you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow when the bell tolls 1. "Couldn't I take 'em all at once and have it over, Jacob?" hinted Scrooge. "Expect the second on the next night at the same hour, the third upon the next night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that, for your own sake, you remember what has passed between us." When it had said these words, the spectre took its wrapper from the table and bound it round its head as before. Scrooge knew this by the smart sound its teeth made when the jaws were brought together by the bandage. The apparition walked backwards from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little, so that when the spectre reached it, it was wide open. It beckoned Scrooge to approach, which he did. When they were within 2 paces of each other, Marley's ghost held up its hand, warning him not to come nearer. Scrooge stopped, not so much in obedience as in surprise and fear. From the raising of the hand, he became sensible of confused noises in the air, incoherent sounds of lamentation and regret, wailings inexpressibly sorrowful and self-accusatory. The spectre, after listening for a moment, joined in the mournful dirge and floated out upon the bleak, dark night. Scrooge followed to the window, desperate in his curiosity. He looked out. The air was filled with phantoms, wandering hither and thither in restless haste, and moaning as they went. Every one of them wore chains like Marley's ghost. Some few, they might be guilty governments, were linked together. None were free. Many had been personally known to Scrooge in their lives. He had been quite familiar with one old ghost in a white waistcoat with a monstrous iron safe attached to its ankle, who cried piteously at being unable to assist a wretched woman with an infant whom it saw below upon a doorstep. The misery with them all was clearly that they sought to interfere for good in human matters, and had lost the power forever. Whether these creatures faded into mist, or mist enshrouded them, he could not tell. But they and their spirit voices faded together, and the night became as it had been when he walked home. Scrooge closed the window, and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double-locked, as he had locked it with his own hands, and the bolts were undisturbed. He tried to say humbug, but stopped at the first syllable. And being, from the emotion he had undergone, or the fatigues of the day, or his glimpse of the invisible world, or the dull conversation of the ghost, or the lateness of the hour, much in need of repose, went straight to bed, without undressing, and fell asleep upon the instant.
As the year comes to a close, We just wanted to thank all our listeners for tuning in to shows on the Head Stuff Podcast Network throughout 2022. We'd especially like to thank all the fantastic Head Stuff Plus members who have supported their favourite podcasters to keep doing what they love to do. You can join hundreds of fellow supporters on headstuffpodcasts.com and get access to loads of bonus content. From all of us here at Head Stuff, we wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
And there we have chapter 1 of A Christmas Carol on Fireside, and I certainly hope you enjoyed it. It's just an absolute cracker of a tale like that. Even doing quite a bit of editing on it, I think I cut about 4,000 or 5,000 words from it, but still pretty much kept all of the beats of the story. But yeah, to anyone who might be lesser familiar with the Christmas Carol or lesser familiar with the book, having seen movie versions of it, or even people who know the book really well, I hope you all enjoyed some aspect of that. What I suppose I'll talk about what resonates with me, and also I was quite interested in the editing process of this because I hadn't really done an edit job like this, because usually I would just take a passage. The first thing I actually edited more so was when I did the Sleepy Hollow. So originally the idea was always wanted to do was Marley's Ghost, because Marley's Ghost is my favourite scene in it. It's my favourite piece of the book. It's my favourite lines all come from Marley's Ghost. And so while taking out little bits of description and prose and a couple of little back and forths, I've kept that pretty much as is. But then again, it's all about the context of it. And even though you very quickly get that, even if I'd just gone in with Marley's Ghost, you get very quickly, very clearly that this was Scrooge's old business partner and that obviously he is dead. But when one of, if not the most iconic line of Christmas Carol, well, probably the most iconic line is God bless us everyone. But pretty much up there is Marley was dead to begin with. It's one of the great opening lines in literature. And that entire first passage has a huge humour to it. And my favourite thing about Dickens' prose is he writes it very much like a storyteller. Dickens, as a narrator, is a character in his own stories. He's not omnipotent in any way. It is just like he is recounting this from recollection or stories he has heard. And that's why I took out, he has a couple of other bits. I shortened the opening passage a bit, but one bit I adored that you don't see in any movie adaptation of it, because they rarely have Dickens as a narrator in it himself, with the exception of the great Gonzo playing Charles Dickens in A Muppet Christmas Carol, of course. But even Gonzo doesn't do this passage, which is where he talks about how he doesn't believe that being dead as a doornail is the most dead piece of ironmongery, that's really a coffin nail. And that little linguistic diatribe is something I, as a word geek, is something I absolutely adore, and imbues it with a casual nature that I think is what has allowed Dickens to allowed him to achieve such popularity at the time, and also to endure that. I think he sometimes criticized for being a bit too pedestrian or whatever, but I don't think there's many people who are greater at prose writing for storytelling's sake than this guy. And I think there's no better example of it than that opening passage. So it really, there's no better setting of a ghost story, and this almost humorous reminder that Marley's dead, and he talks about this idea of you need to know he's dead, and you need to remember he's dead, or else this won't be scary, or this won't make sense to you in any way. And so then we carry on. It very much starts instantly, and the nephew comes in, and the nephew's section is important to me for two reasons. Number one is that I feel you need to meet Scrooge first of all and see him at his day-to-day business and see him with his clerk Bob Cratchit, but also you get the nephew as this total antithesis to Scrooge. He's warm, he's kind, he's poor. To Scrooge is the one who has far more reason to hate Christmas than he does, because Scrooge is rich and secure. But they are totally at opposition to each other. bound by this family sense, or certainly the nephew feels bound and feels the effort to reconnect and constantly make the effort with his uncle. And so it's really nice seeing the Christmas spirit, the generous Christmas spirit, even for a moment in Fred, before we see the consequences of Scrooge's miserly nature. I also just love the nephews for a very biased reason, because that was the character I played in A Christmas Carol, and I was very, very fond of Fred. I found him very, very challenging to play, actually, but the fact that I got to do all my scenes pretty much with Owen Rowe, who was playing Scrooge, who's one of the greatest Irish theatre actors ever, and he was an incredibly generous and kind and really, really funny guy to work with, and it was a huge, huge thrill to work with him, and to get to do scenes with him. But my favourite scene every night in this show was the Marley's Ghost scene, and Marley's Ghost was played by an incredible actor named Simon O'Gorman, and he also played Scrooge's father in these flashback scenes that we did. And Katie Davenport, incredible costume designer and set designer, did Marley's Ghost came out in a diving bell. He was wearing this huge, massive scuba suit with this huge chain behind him, and visually it was something that will stay with me forever. And I think I've always loved the Marley's Ghost scene and loved the dialogue and the prose of it, but that just cemented it in my brain as my favourite part of one of my favourite stories. So then we, of course, get straight into it, where Scrooge is confronted with this ghost, and we get this huge moralistic nature to it then. And some critics of A Christmas Carol have pointed that it's almost just like entirely, it's like, is it secular and inspired by, folklore and other ghost stories, or is it just like this Christian allegory of like why we should all be terrified of not leading good lives and not leading good Christian lives, But then I don't think, because it can get quite moralistic with it, and like certainly to me, kind of, I think it is scary, and it's scary by like this real consequence, but I don't think it gets too Christian allegory, because like it doesn't say Scrooge will go to hell and burn forever. It's kind of this worse in a way level of limbo, of purgatory, where you're physically being weighted down by the chains of these sins and crimes you formed in life. And the worst of all, and the thing that like was really most disturbing to me, again, something you don't see as much in visual representations of this story, is all the other ghosts when Marley floats out at the end, and you see just like the sky filled with people, and Scrooge knows so many of them, and this image of this man, the scene at the end, like I nearly cut this out, but then I just kept it in because it just stuck with me so much. The image of this one man with a safe hanging around him, crying because he's unable to help a woman and her child freezing in a doorstep. That this remorse, I heard Christopher Hitchens recently talking about, or like an old thing naturally of him talking about the difference between remorse and regret, which is regret is for things that you've done, but remorse is for things that you haven't done. And these are just these incredibly remorseful beings that are unable to be saved, but Scrooge can be saved. And there's the hope there in this. There's obviously hope for Scrooge, but I always like to think that there is some hope for Marley's Ghost, that the idea of if he can save Scrooge, or allow Scrooge to save himself, that might alleviate his passage. And so if this was somehow, or for any reason, was this an introduction to the actual book or of this story, or if you hadn't read it in a long time, or if you'd just seen a movie of it, I really hope that this will encourage a couple of people to read the rest of the book if they haven't done so, or hadn't done so in a long time, because it is a magnificent story. And if you're a fan of this podcast, I don't think there's anything in it, and just his mastery of prose and description, and his visceral, very almost like Germanic words that just like really get these images of these characters' appearance and personality across, is obviously incredibly interesting and very educational for me as a writer, but also like as a performer, to get to wrap my lips around these words. We had a chorus of sorts in A Christmas Carol, so that was where we did a lot of these narration parts, but they were divided a lot between us, and some of us were on stage for some bits and some not for others. And so it was wonderful to revisit, obviously, Fred, the nephew's lines that I did, and the lines that are in this that weren't in the adaptation I did, or lines of dialogue, of prose narration that I had done, and others that I hadn't, just to get to really revisit all these lines and visit these lines for the first time. And I have to say, the primary point of this was, I'd always wanted to share the story, but was to get myself in some kind of spirit of Christmas, and it has certainly done that, and I hope it can to all of you. So it ended up being quite another long one, but I hope you don't mind that. I hope you get to listen to this by a fireside over the Christmas break at some point, and that this can give you a bit of warmth. And I hope that everyone out there does have very safe, pleasant, and obviously very happy Christmas. I know this can be a very difficult time for a lot of people who maybe don't have as good a relationship with home, or can't go home, or have to be away, or any of the other infinite difficult situations that people can find them in. This can be a time that exacerbates that, when it's a time associated with, family and togetherness, and, materialism, and the pressure of buying presents and spending time with people. Like, it's a huge amount of pressure, and it's something that we should never take for granted. And there's a lot of more appropriate people to talk about any of this stuff than I can, but I will just say that much at least. And as always, yes, I hope that this podcast can just be a little bit of light, a little bit of an ember in anybody's day or anybody's Christmas time. And so I think there's nothing better to leave with than that. I hope you all enjoyed this. I hope you all have a very happy Christmas, wherever you're spending it around the world. Next week might take, I probably won't take a week's break. I probably won't take the time off, but we will see where we'll go on to that. I think we're going to have a folktale, an Irish folktale about the Lake of Healing, which is one of the old folktales that I had lined up before I went to New Zealand, but did the Maui episode instead. So I have that one to go, or I might go in another direction. I haven't actually written that one yet. That will be when I get home, because I will be flying home in a couple of days. So this will be the last episode recorded in New Zealand, for the moment at least. So one more time, all the usual things. Follow me over on Instagram at Fireside Bard. You can buy Garden Sea in paperback or in Kindle version. All the links are in the description below. You can support Headstuff Plus at headstuffpodcast.com. I will see you all. You'll hear me all next time. One more time, I hope you all have a great Christmas, a happy holidays, and a happy New Year. If it's not out before then, but it should be before. It should be like the 28th or 29th, but we'll see. I will see you all. You'll hear me all. And remember, wherever you are and wherever you go, you can always join me by the fireside.
This show is part of the Headstuff Podcast Network, a hub for the creative and the curious. Shows are produced in association with Headstuff and the Podcast Studios Dublin. Find out more or become a member at headstuffpodcasts.com.